It's handy when I don't forget this, because it does kind of quiet people down. Hello, everyone. Thank you. It looks like we've got a pretty full room, so we'll be counting on you containing the sound level enough so that everybody can hear what our wonderful representatives have to say and people's questions and answers. So the session is started. You guys are actually into the work in the House and on committees, and I think we'd kind of like to hear what you're up to and what your thoughts are on some of the legislative goings on, and just generally, if people have questions, if you could wait until they're kind of have your first say on what's going on intro and kind of open things up to questions, and just hang on to those thoughts for a moment, please. I give you Representative Holly Stover and Chloe Maxmin.
So, good evening, and I'll start. Someone has to. And I just want to thank the people in the room, both those that voted for me because they live in my district and those that supported me because we're family. And it has made, I guess, coming home and knowing that you have a huge web of support really makes this worthwhile when you get hundreds of emails a day and calls and those sorts of things. So far, the session for me has been very positive. There are, as you know, and you may have read, there are approximately 2,000 bills, so not everything has been printed. I've learned a bit about bills, resubmitting bills, lobbyists, and resubmitting bills, and not all of my bills are printed yet either. I can talk a little about that. As for our routine, I serve on the Health and Human Services Committee, which is not a coincidence since I worked for the state and worked in Health and Human Services my whole career. So that has been.
If you could stand, people are having a hard time hearing you.
Oh,
Sorry.
me. Thank you for being here tonight. The session began in January, but we were sworn in a month before that, which between the time we were sworn in and we began session, we began to talk to our constituents and also internally in the House about different bills that we launched before we even took our seats in January, although we continued after that. I have, and I'm ashamed to say I should know off the top of my head, and the number 7 and 9 ring in my head, and I'm not sure which it is. I have several bills in. Some of them they sound small in context, but they're large in intent. I'll give you an example. I have a bill to add victims of domestic violence or sexual assault to the Maine Human Rights Act, because when you're a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault and you either have to tell your landlord or your employer about the domestic violence, and you may have a PFA, a protection from abuse order, and there have been instances where people experience discrimination, both in housing, because landlords don't want to accept the risk of having you there, and also discrimination in employment. And even though there's another bill that protects employment status, I think recognizing this as discrimination under the Human Rights Act is really important. So that's probably sounds small, but it's actually really huge. Yay. And there are, I'm not going to probably be able to talk about all of them tonight, but the other one I would raise for your attention is I authored a bill, and so did 2 other people, to eliminate the use of single-use plastic bags in the state. And I know a lot of people... And a lot of people have talked about that. Why is that necessary? Although I will say, if you live in Damascotta, you've already gone there, so this won't be hard for you. But there, and I think when Damascotta adopted, and Chloe may know better, I think there are 20 or 21 municipalities, including Damascotta, that have accepted the ban on plastic bags. And the issue with plastic bags, as we know, it's made of chemicals. It clogs drains, it gets in the ocean, fish eat it, then the fish eat the poison, then we eat the fish. And to me, it's just another way to remove toxins from our environment. And I also think that we all have really nice reusable bags, and what's the harm in that, because I like mine. But there has been a lot of positive. People generally have accepted the fact this is the way the state is going to go. But since there were 3 people who submitted slightly different versions of this, we have now pulled all 3 out, and we're merging and coming together, and then we'll be resubmitting the final with a triple co-sponsor. Not co, that'd be tri-sponsor.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting to be able to work across and work with other people on a bill.
Holly, who are the other ones on the?
It is Dave McCrae and, help me here, it's Nicole Grahowski, yes. Those are the 3 of us. And I'm trying to think of my other bills, and I'm feeling rather blank at the moment. But I do serve on HHS, Health and Human Services, which we are responsible for. The Department of Health and Human Services has $2 billion of the state budget. And that is, so we have a tremendous amount of responsibility, and what comes with that is a lot of bills. And because it's the Department of Health and Human Services, it branches from everything from water testing and lead, all the way to child welfare, adult protective services, 2 state hospitals, and a really, and the Medicaid program, which is always a very large subject. I know there's mixed, Medicaid expansion happened because of Governor Mills, and that there are approximately 10,000 people now that have been enrolled in the time since it was enacted. So that's moving along. And we talk about hospital tax and how to keep our healthcare system in this state afloat, because as you know, there's some challenges there as well. I find, and I don't know what Chloe will say, but I find the work in the House chambers to be exciting. I have seen more than one unanimous vote, which is really exciting. And we no longer sit on sides. I think people are aware of that. The sides, now we just are mixed all up. So I think that's another advantage, because you get to know your seatmates and the people in front of you, and you talk. You just talk like people, and like you do your coworkers, because they are your colleagues and coworkers. And I'm going to stop there so that Chloe can have a chance, and then we'll have questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you for inviting us here to speak. It has been such an honor. I admire you so much, and it's just been such an honor to serve with so many incredible people in Augusta. I don't usually dress like this. I don't know if y'all know that about me, but I had to completely revamp my wardrobe for this job. So there's a really strict dress code in Augusta. I can't wear jeans into the chamber, so that was a big problem for me. But at the same time, it's every Tuesday and Thursday I put on these clothes that I wouldn't normally wear, and it completely changes my mindset and my attitude, my behavior as I walk into this really august body that I respect it. I've spent so much of my life furious at our political system, but being on the inside, I do have respect for the integrity of the process, not always how it's distorted or manipulated, but its core intention. I echo a lot of what Holly said. I found it to be such a fascinating experience. It really matters who we elect. I think that, it's kind of state representative, state senator, what does that even mean? And it's been easy to overlook some of these offices, but they have a huge impact. We're making really big decisions in Augusta. So it's really important that we're electing folks who are thinking the right way and asking good questions and staying in touch with our communities. I don't know if y'all know this, but the way the bill process works is we have this thing called cloture, which is on December 31st, and you have to submit all the bills that you want to work on for your entire 2-year term by December 31st, which is tricky because we're elected on November 6th. And then there's Thanksgiving and Christmas in there as well. And for someone like me, I know what I'm interested in. I know what my constituents need. I know the platforms from the campaign trail, but how do you turn something like, we want more transportation in rural Maine into an actual bill? So it's this really interesting process, and quite quickly you start to meet with lobbyists. Not always a dirty word, as I found, and a lot of lobbyists have been really helpful understanding the context and history of certain efforts in Augusta and providing really invaluable resources and connections. Because I'm new to this space, but they've been around there for a long time, for better or for worse. So you meet with a lot of people, you craft your bills, you submit your bills. You can submit bills after December 31st if they're emergency bills, which is usually taken pretty literally, and an emergency bill has to be passed with 2/3 majority instead of just a simple majority. So it's a whole nother process. I have 4 bills in. They all came from conversations that I had from door knocking. One is a resolution around the Windfall elimination provision. Do y'all know about this thing? For those who don't know, if you work in the public and the private sector and you're paying into 2 retirement plans, when you retire, your Social Security benefits are cut because you're double dipping, as Ronald Reagan put it. So it requires a national fix, and all we can do in Maine is submit a resolution. So I put in the resolution, and I'm hoping it will pass so I can work with some of our federal representatives on this issue, because it's really messed up.
Thank you, Chloe, on
Yeah.
behalf of me.
Yeah, I heard
one
it
of
all
those
over,
people.
and it's like,
Yeah,
what?
my
It's
parents.
this really technical thing, but almost everybody has an experience with it. I put in another bill around sexual assault kit storage, which I learned about from a nurse in Nobleboro when I went door knocking. So if you're sexually assaulted and you have a rape kit, how long do you think it's stored for in Maine law? Wait, sorry, a little louder. 10 years. What else do you think?
30 days.
30 days. Okay, those are 2 drastic things. Anything else in the middle?
2 years.
2 years.
1 year.
1 year. Okay, I'm hearing mostly years. You were actually closest. It's 90 days. After 90 days, there's no guarantee that your sexual assault kit will still be at the police station. So I put in a bill that has changed that to 8 years, which aligns with most statute of limitations and some other physical storage things. So that was exciting. It got a unanimous ought to pass from the Criminal Justice Committee, and that will be going under the hammer in the next couple weeks, I think. So that was a good one. And then I have a bill in that will create a new waiver for Maine Care members over 61 to provide transportation access for non-medical basic needs. So if you're in Maine Care, you already have access to transportation for medical needs, and this would extend that service. So if you have a family emergency, you need to go to the grocery store, the bank, that this service will be available to you as well. It's a lot easier and more feasible to do something like this than to create a whole new transportation infrastructure for rural Maine. And my last bill is called an Act to Establish a Green New Deal for Maine, which has a very poppy title, which I did on purpose, but it is very different from what's under discussion at the national level. It's targeted legislation instead of a super broad resolution. It was crafted with deep involvement from the labor community, which is really important because it truly came out of door knocking. I mean, we all want good jobs, growing industries to protect our natural resources and to make sure that we have a solid future here in Maine. So that's what this Green New Deal bill will do, and make sure that as we're making the inevitable transition to renewable energy, that it is just and fair and equitable for all Mainers while creating economic opportunity. So those are my bills. I'm on the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee, which is pretty perfect for District 88 because we have a lot of farms. We cover everything from the Park Service to all of the animal welfare and veterinary laws. So it's a huge gamut. But I think the key takeaway is that I feel like it is my responsibility to communicate with my constituents to make sure that I'm available and transparent and accessible. So often I felt as a constituent that the onus is on me to reach out and to understand what's happening, and I really try and reverse that as much as I can. At the same time, it's a citizen legislature, so we work at least for me, you're on HHS, so it's a little bit more full-time, but on my committee, I'm in Augusta 2 days a week. We're in session for half the year, but it's a full-time workload. So it really makes you think about how our political system is structured to exclude certain voices and why so much of the policy that comes out of political spaces is skewed towards certain people. And I think that's something that we gotta think about pretty hard. But overall, it's my honor to serve District 88, and I do the best to represent my community.
Oh, questions?
Yeah, I have a question for both of you. How are you making it possible for constituents to meet with you and talk with you?
I've started as of this month, because it took a while to get going. We have our first meeting at the Boothbay Harbor Library on Saturday morning to see anybody who wants to come down and just have a discussion. There's no format. It's informal. It's to hear from you what your concerns are, what you have read or know about what's going on or what you don't know. And I hope to be doing those in Bristol or South Bristol and Westport and routinely on the peninsula. So that's my plan, and I kind of copied it from her.
Similarly, I do a monthly coffee with Chloe in Jefferson, so people can just stop by and hang out and drink coffee and talk about everything. They've been really good so far. So many people have turned up. I also have been writing. I wanted to do this once a month, but it's taken me a second. Articles for the Lincoln County News, doing little updates, and I just put one in this week, introducing all my bills to folks. I also try and just be really public with all my contact information, for better or for worse. It makes me really uncomfortable, but it's my job and my responsibility. And just really encourage folks to share. I say this to all of you, to share my number or my email. I will call you back within 2 hours and try and just connect with you as best as I can.
And I just want to put out there that I'm so incredibly grateful and happy to have such articulate, smart, bright, engaged representatives for this area. And it's wonderful to sit here and listen to you articulate. And having said that, when I'm out in my community, you meet all kinds of people. And one thing that just stops me in my tracks is somebody who would come up to me and say, yeah, it's great, get ready for socialism. And it just makes my jaw drop, and I just don't know what to say to that negativity. So what would be your response to somebody in the community? Probably you encounter it more.
I do.
Than Chloe.
Night.
But yeah, what do you say to people? Like, is there a comeback that's easy to remember?
Really have a comeback, but what I would say is that I, like anyone else in the legislature, have a fiscal responsibility to be a responsible steward. I'm not representing myself, I'm not representing this party, I am representing the district and all of the people in the district. So when I vote, or when I think, or when I read with in the back of my mind what's best for my community, what's best for the people who I serve. And I do that first. That's my filter. And I try to gather as much input from anybody who wants to hear it. I think, and this is my personal bias, that some of the mistakes that we've made is when we divide votes based on how we believe. I really think that as representatives, when I think I am representative of District 89, that's mean I represent every person in District 89. And how they think and how they want life to be in our communities. And that's how I do it.
Could I do a follow-up?
Sure.
I was at the public hearing and testified on behalf of ranked choice voting and the presidential primary on Wednesday. And there was a real discussion about representing the state versus representing the district. And I think it can be confusing as advocates to help steward relationships with our representatives when they vacillate to supporting their district versus supporting the state of Maine as it was in the referendums that now has ranked choice voting the law.
Well, you have to take into consideration if there is an existing law, that it is in place, and then I have to weigh that decision. But I had something I wanted to say, Julia, and I just went,
Welcome to my world.
yeah, right?
Our world.
And it'll come back to me, but I guess in terms of how you represent that vote, I wish I could poll every single person. I've actually thought about it. I've sat it in the evening and gone, I wonder if I put like a yes/no button, Facebook, just to do a poll to get a sense of how people were thinking. I think that it would just help me sometimes to get that kind of feedback. Some of it's 50-50 and some of it is not. And I try to listen. I don't have a preconceived agenda. Chloe and I both get support and guidance from our party. That's absolutely true. Every morning we do meet when we're there, and we go over a lot of bills, we go over a lot of information, and I think that it's pretty clear that if the party has a particular position and you feel particularly strongly or differently, that you're encouraged to talk about that and work that through. So I don't think it's black and white. I find lots of gray, and I think there's lots to think about when you vote. It is the ultimate responsibility while you're there.
If I could just add on that, because I think for communities like ours that are not predominantly Democratic, that this is actually something that keeps me up at night, because so much of what the traditional Democratic Party is introducing doesn't necessarily translate to the realities of a rural community. I'm going to put out one example, is paid sick leave, which is something that we're considering this session. And of course I support paid sick leave, but the exemptions are for businesses with 5 employees or fewer. And I have had businesses reaching out to me that have between 5 and 15 employees that are scared because they're not going to be able to afford what's coming down the line. So I feel like I live in gray, I guess.
Right.
It's so hard to say. There's a lot of yes and, but at the end of the day, you have to click a yes button or a no button, and all of the different factors that go into your decision. Your own moral compass, your community. I think on some level we do have a responsibility to the state on some big issues. Although my first responsibility is to my community. These are all things that swirl around, and it's really tricky. And I think for me especially, it's tricky when with the party system, because you're voting most of the time in blocks, not always, and you don't have to, but there's not a lot of room for nuance, I guess I would say.
Yes, go ahead. Yep.
Hi. I wanted to ask Holly if you're in HHS, are you also dealing with the anti-vaccinations and that problem in that area or that arena? And if so, did you know about an admitted male father who exposed 9 children? He has 9 children. Every single one of them were exposed to what was it? Chickenpox.
So I should say right now, it was originally to go to HHS and it did not. It was sent to education. So no, I did not.
Wow.
And actually, we got moved out because they needed 6 overflow rooms because there were hundreds of people there
Yes.
that felt very strongly about that. So no, I did not.
Okay, so.
And the work session hasn't been held yet. I don't know when that's going to be, but.
I've got 2 questions that are not, they're state-oriented. What about Central Maine's power thing coming through the western part of the state? And how does it help Maine, if it does at all? And with basically, if you're going to renewable energy with global warming and stuff, you don't need all those big power grids, because usually the solar and the wind don't need all the grids like they have. Any thoughts on that? Is that happening? Anything talking about that? And this is 2 state things, but it's very important. And it tears up a lot of our state if it goes in. And I know Janet Mills is supposedly for it.
Somebody should put a coin on this
I'll
also.
throw it out at you.
I'll grab it. 'Cause, so here's what I think, is that there are really difficult decisions to make sometimes, and I'm not speaking for the governor, nor talked to her about this or been inside her head. I'm just saying that there are decisions you have to make, and one of those decisions sometimes can be to raise taxes, and I know she's very committed to not raising taxes. The other is looking at what might be appealing as a deal, and $248 million is a lot of money. And I'm not saying that's the impetus or the reason, but I think there are very difficult choices to make. And we have not weighed in on this, but I try to weigh it in my mind as you're constantly having to juggle very difficult choices. And when there's an option for revenue, and I think that,
Does it help global warming though?
no.
There's a study.
There's a study,
By the
There
way,
is a study.
there's a
mostly,
study around it.
mostly it doesn't. I
Yeah.
heard
I
that.
don't want to say anything.
There's information on both sides of that, so want to mention?
I am against the CMP corridor. It goes through Whitefield, which is in my district, and Whitefield did approve it, although I've only met 2 residents that I've met who support it. So most people I meet don't want it. I think there is a bill in from Senator Brownie Carson that would require a study to understand the greenhouse gas emissions from building the pipeline, from the corridor. I believe that's it. But it would add that other dimension, like, okay, we're talking about, is this going to reduce our regional greenhouse gas emissions or not? It's like, okay, well, what's the actual impact of building this thing when you take into account deforestation and all of the other costs going into it? I think this is a problem that Massachusetts created for itself without thinking long-term about its renewable energy goals. And Seth Berry also just put in a bill that would require the towns along the corridor route to approve it via referendum before it could get approved by the state. So that's another approach that's going in, which I feel like is where it's going to go, to local control issues. But because most towns have voted against it.
Are they still requiring an examination, environmental proof that it's not going to have any harm?
The study.
So there is a study there's a bill to do a study around the environmental impacts of building the corridor, but the DEP hasn't weighed in yet, and the PUC hasn't released its decision yet. If anyone is interested, I think it's the PUC. The PUC is having hearings in Farmington the whole week of April 1st. If you just Google April 1st PUC CMP hearings, I did it the other night, and they come right up if you wanted to go. It's like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day if you want to have your voice heard.
I was reading that sort of alongside, because CMP has a number of problems besides the Florida. But alongside it, I understand that there's another bill being introduced, or has been introduced, to the state equivalent of nationalizing CMP and getting it back from the Spanish. Any word from the Hill about what the status of that might be?
Yeah, so it's right now CMP and Emera Maine are investor-owned utilities, and this is a proposal to create one statewide consumer-owned utility. So the responsibility of the utility would be to the ratepayer instead of to the investor, and most of CMP's investors are not from Maine, nor from the United States. So it's received a ton of bipartisan support. It's a really amazing bill. Basically all of the workers from CMP and Emera would have their same jobs. Our rates would be reduced significantly. There's an amazing fact sheet that was going around if you're interested in that. But I am super supportive of the bill. I think it's exactly what we need. There are already consumer-owned utilities in Maine. Backyard Farms, the tomato thing, they set up shop in Madison, Maine, because there's a consumer-owned utility there, and they pay a lot less for their electricity and have a much more profitable business because of that. So I don't think that the public hearing has been held yet.
Is that Seth Berry's bill?
It is Seth Berry's bill, but it's coming soon.
Does it have an LD number now?
It does. I can get it for you. I don't know what it is.
One follow-up question on that. Do you know if that bill has a bond issue?
For the purchase.
It does. It uses a revenue bond, which doesn't require legislative approval, but it is a bond that we have to pay back. But I forget the exact numbers, but the amount that we're paying back is far less than the amount that we're paying right now for the interest rates on the infrastructure that CMP is installing.
You could tell them there's one person in your community that'll buy $10,000 worth of those bonds.
I don't have my bag with me.
Do the representatives have any interaction or communication with the governor's staff, or do you get it secondhand through the leadership?
I think that option is always there. So if you did have something particular, or you had a constituent, I've had constituents who wanted to get through to the governor, a message or something, and I've just done that connection for them with the office, the constituency office. And, but I don't think there would be any restriction on that. And I think that communication back and forth has been very open. And the governor has been accessible and available, and if you don't know, she's been pretty visible. So, but I have referred people over to the Office of Constituency to let them manage the details of that and schedule her.
Okay, so, Don? And then you next.
I think I read in the Free Press about your environmental bill. There's a possibility that instead of through taxation being funded, it could be done through a bond issue. Is that something that is possible?
Yes. So with the Green New Deal bill, most of the work is developing pretty large-scale programs like green job training programs, making sure that there's subsidized solar and heat pumps available for live heat homes, stuff like that. So that's going to be fleshed out in a task force. The one big piece of the bill that is not in a task force is a solar on schools program that would create a voluntary net metering program for schools to participate in so that they can reduce their energy costs and lower our property taxes. And so with that piece, I'm teaming up with Representative Jim Handy from Lewiston. He has a bond in already that would help schools reduce their fossil fuel use. So we're collaborating in that way so that I think it's $15 million. You know, the transition will cost more than $15 million eventually, but we're starting with existing proposals out there so that there is not an undue burden on Maine taxpayers.
Go ahead. And then Lydia, next.
Question for Holly. The three bills on the single, on the ban with the single-use plastic, what's the difference between them?
Oh, I think for mine, I can speak for mine, it was a little too cumbersome. And what we were able to do is to work with the Retailers Association and pull some of the more unnecessary stuff out around getting probably too much in the weeds on describing plastic and describing the thickness, and we've really worked with them to pull out something that seems very reasonable to them, similar to what they're doing around the rest of the state, so that everybody, I think the goal is to make sure that from Kittery to Fort Kent, we would have something similar. And it looks like for the towns, the only discrepancy between the towns that are doing it now seems to be the 5 cents for a paper bag. And rather than say that it's a bill to eliminate plastic bags, I think it's a bill to encourage the use of reusable bags. That's what I really want to think of it as. So.
Lydia first.
Yeah, Holly, I'm just interested, since the death of 2 young children in the last couple of years, working with Child Protective Services, I'm wondering what the state is doing to support that group of workers who are doing really important work and often come under the limelight of being at fault for child deaths and injuries, and how we as a community can support keeping children safe.
Frontline workers, a survey of really about the status of their work and their workplace. And there's a number of there were many questions in this study. And it was confidential, and they were able to submit, and it's actually part of my homework because I have to read this report and synthesize it down for the committee. But what I will say is that there are a few factors, and I think they've been in the press. They were terribly understaffed for a long period of time. The morale was not good, and I'm going to say, in my opinion, because I was a state employee, they're underpaid, they're overworked. Because of the work shortage, if you can just picture in your mind, because of the work shortage, if there's a crisis, you have to continue to work, just like a fireman, but you would have to continue to work until the crisis is over. And there were several workers in Portland who reported being mandated to stay in hotel rooms because they could not find foster homes. And so all of it culminated certainly with the attention paid to the death of 2 children, one right here in Lincoln County. And so the 2 reports that are out now are the workers' report and ways to remediate and also rebuild that system. At the root of that is to rebuild the child protective system. That includes the workers, but also the responsiveness, the timeliness of response, and the thoroughness of response. And part of that sits over in another, like over here in intake, because intake is a telephone, usually comes in by telephone and then goes out to the district. So they're looking at a new system, they're looking comprehensively at the workforce, and most importantly, there were a number of positions. It's very hard to recruit people to do those jobs because they're really hard jobs, and not a lot of thanks. And so they're working on recruitment with a number of vacancies. There are a lot of vacancies in Child Protective Services. Go to maine.gov, employment, and look at how many vacancies they are. So if you have more workers, you can spread that load lighter. The less workers, you have much higher caseloads. The acuity is very high in those caseloads, and you are making life and death decisions. And that's a lot to put on anybody. But when you're doubling the caseload and giving them much less time and tools to do it, I think it's certainly not the way to assess a worker's effectiveness. So I know that the new commissioner, Jean Lambreau, is amazing. We have met with her quite a bit. She is brilliant. She is realistic. And she has some ideas. First of all, there were also 111 vacancies over at the Maine CDC. Not that that has anything to do with your question, but it's just there are hundreds of empty positions that they're working very hard to fill. It takes a while to train a worker, and so they're trying to look at ways to do that most efficiently and get people back on the ground. And the other part of how can we support those people? I think recognizing that they have not an impossible job, but a very difficult job. And if you can imagine, because I have gone into homes where there's always an element of risk or danger that you have to imagine for that workforce, that's a really tough thing to send you out. They don't send you alone, obviously, when you're serving a protection order, or a PPO, a preliminary protection order to take custody of a child. You usually go with law enforcement. But I think if you know anybody who does that work, just telling them that you know how hard it is, just showing that appreciation. I think filling the positions, looking at pay grades, and providing more avenues for supervision. Not only in this report did they talk about rising caseloads, people were doubling on their caseloads, and because of vacancies, they weren't getting as much supervision and having to make really fast decisions. And then also, if you're overburdened with the size of your caseload and the acuity, being able to go back and check. Although that is a requirement to go back and check on those placements, there were a number of things that OPEGA found in that whole systems report on those cases. Those have been, I think they're public documents, it's been analyzed, and there were things that didn't happen the way they were supposed to. We all know that, obviously. 2 children are dead. Unnecessarily, unjustly, but what could be done differently? And so that's on the worker side, and then the commissioner is also looking at a redesign. And she is actually doing a national search to find the best person who can come in and run that office. So.
How's the funding stream?
For what?
For that department, for DHHS?
For the whole department?
Yeah.
what's the funding stream?
Yeah, I mean,
It is,
was it cut and now you're trying to build it back up, or, you know?
no, there were no cuts. It was just the positions were left unfilled and people were doubled up on their workload. And part of it is because hiring's difficult for low-paying jobs that demand a lot of your personal strength.
I know.
Okay, this is on Planned Parenthood. Where is that going now? And we have growth of children with special needs in schools. How can we prevent that? And what is causing it? No, I'm serious.
No, I know, it's not funny.
So I don't know.
I just was wondering about their expertise, that's all, I'm sorry.
Well,
Planned Parenthood,
Title 10?
I don't know what it is.
Funding, yeah.
Title 10 funds, right? They're threatened to be cut. I can't speak to that without doing some research. In terms of why schools, I mean, we could look at a number of things, but, I mean, if you think back 50 years ago, everybody that was a little different got shipped off to an institution. And that wasn't the right answer either. And so children are being raised in communities, as part of communities, as part of families, and I think that might be part of the shift you see. Because 50 years ago, like I said, they were just sent away and not seen again. Why, I don't know. Why they were sent away is my question, but I don't know if there was another part of that question.
Okay, what caused that? The different function?
Oh, let's,
Okay, I guess not, okay.
we'll have to bring a doctor.
Or, I'm not sure even the scientists and doctors are to that yet.
It's very complicated.
So we've got a number of people. Bob, you spoke once.
I'm gonna throw another curve
Well,
at you.
hang on a second, Bob.
I
Hang on a
believe-
second, Bob.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there anyone here who has not spoken, that has a question? Okay, see, just Autumn, and then we'll let people start speaking, asking questions again. Okay, and two at the back after you, Autumn.
I think you both mentioned broadband. Broadband was mentioned by the governor. I'm trying to catch up on what the bills are, but there are 2,000, as you said, so I haven't really got there. What's going on besides the CNP promise for that corridor folk? Is there anything else happening?
I have looked at some of the broadband bills. None of them are specifically coming to mind. I think there's a big broadband bond in. I think that's the main route. I know that in Whitefield, I've met with a lot of folks from the Whitefield Select Board because they're renegotiating their contract with Spectrum, and have done some really interesting dives into what local communities can do regardless of what happens at the state level, like public broadband utilities. So the town owns its own internet, and a lot of these different models that create low cost, high access and availability broadband. So the Lincoln County Planning Commission as well just did a, wait, I saw that.
Regional Planning
They're doing
Commission.
something with like 10 of the towns, but not all of them.
Yeah, not,
So,
I think Whitefield is part of
yeah, I think they are.
them,
We're
but
not, so
yeah,
that's why
not
I'm
all
asking.
of, the Lincoln County Planning Commission got a grant to do broadband work in some towns in Lincoln County, but not all the towns.
Right.
Can I could
but-
speak to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, well, I used to be on the Regional Planning Commission. I am no longer. But I've been going to those meetings because I'm a selectman in the town of Somerville. And the reason that they went after getting that planning grant is because before I left the Regional Planning Commission, I was pushing for it. We'd love to have the whole county involved in planning how do we build out the right quality broadband to everywhere that there isn't some already in Lincoln County. And I'm sure that at the next round of funding, this is only a very preliminary grant so far to do some planning and getting a better sense of how much interest and uptake there is in the communities, among businesses, among residents, and to start hearing about what the incumbents have to offer, what other communities have done and been successful at, building it out, getting a sense of how it might be approached. The next stage is going to be trying to look deeper into the details. How do you structure it? What's the revenue stream? Do you have a regional municipal utility? Do you have all of the towns in Lincoln County or some of the towns in Lincoln County join in that? Do you seek some towns outside of Lincoln County to join in where it makes sense? I mean, my little town of Somerville is surrounded by 4 counties and 4 towns. And one of them is Lincoln that we're in, but there's 3 other counties and each of the bordering towns in a different one. Yet the roads that go through our town head into the other counties beside us in other towns. So there's all of that conversation going on. Please do express interest in your town and getting involved in looking together at solutions in Lincoln County and potentially beyond.
I believe Boothbay and Boothbay Harbor are part of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
They've already started.
And some communities have started projects. Westport Island is actually doing some work already on that and is getting some assistance in that because they are an island from the Island Institute and the work they're doing on broadband to do planning in conjunction with neighboring across the water communities. And I think that this is an area where what happens in the legislature is going to be more a matter of enabling whether the towns have a means to proceed. But there is a lot of reason to want to do better than simply ask an incumbent to come build it. Because what most of the incumbents want to build out is not based on fiber cable. There are some who are, and that's wonderful. The ones who are even are not interested in making it open to everyone else to use it. So I look at towns in which you have telephone, you have cable, and you might have other services as well. But how do you offer to the places where there isn't either of those yet, not only internet, but the possibility of delivering phone service, delivering cable service over what the town builds out? And if one incumbent is going to own that, then that's the one service that those people are going to get over it. But if the municipality or the regional municipal district owns it and pays under contract someone with the skills of the incumbents or others to build and maintain it, then it can be open to the multiple services being delivered to the townspeople and not at a profit for the infrastructure beyond what it costs to pay somebody to maintain it. And towns can get creative in doing certain things. Some of the islands have run some of their cables on poles that they put up themselves for the project rather than on utility poles. But it's a tough problem for rural Maine, and we're hoping to be part of the many communities in the state that are trying to figure out how to make that work in rural communities. So you have a chance to get involved and come to some of the meetings at the Regional Planning Commission around broadband. The last one that was held was publicly advertised for people to come, and I'm sure there'll be more.
Okay.
Been dying to ask a question.
Yeah, Colorado and New Mexico just passed it. I believe a bunch of other states are, do you know, aware of anything? Are we going to eliminate the electoral college and go to a popular vote by the state? And I read just recently Maine is one of the states that probably can go that way. And I think that's an important thing. In other words, abolishing the electoral college. It's you got to get enough states to do it. You revise the Constitution, the electoral college goes away, strictly a popular vote. So
There is a bill.
There is a bill, good.
There is a bill.
Okay, I knew it was quick, but I mean, I just wanted to be aware of it.
It doesn't get rid of the electoral college. It
Right.
just makes a workaround.
So,
And it's a great idea. I hope that Maine passes it. But unfortunately, it would take a lot more than that to abolish the electoral.
so
The electoral college isn't actually abolishable, but what you can do is this national popular vote will assign the electoral college to whichever candidate gets the majority of the popular vote. So that's the only way that you can do it.
it's a compact among states. Agreement that how the popular vote works out is how they'll apportion the votes of their delegates to the electoral college.
There's a number of states that have done that already. Their state legislatures have done it.
Yeah. I mean, it would be possible to abolish electoral college if we could get a small thing such as an amendment to our Constitution through. And it's not as though it's difficult. I mean, it's only been decades since we tried to get Equal Rights Amendment passed for women. I mean, and we've got half the population on our side, I think, at least. So how we make it happen, I think that the national popular vote is a response to the fact that this is something that's not going to happen easily, but a lot of people feel that it is important to have that proportional outcome to people's votes, and that every vote is counted the same. So it's a lot of driving. Yes.
So here's my final question. Is there a priority, since we're all Democrats here in Lincoln County, is there a priority
We're not.
that the state Democratic Party in the legislature is trying to get you all to coalesce around, and how can we be of help?
Single priority other than
I don't,
healthcare?
yeah, I don't think there's not. The big public Democratic priorities that I've heard are paid sick leave and paid family leave. Those are getting a lot of push. I think that we have to right the ship, you know. There's like what Holly alluded to is so much at the core of it, and there's so much that has to be done on so many different fronts. So there's almost every legislator that I encounter is really passionate about what they're working on, and everyone has an amazing bills that are going to do, if they pass, can do really great things for our state. So I think it would be, you know, what I tell folks is what do you care about, what do you want to help push forward, figure out who's the sponsor on that bill, who the co-sponsors are, reach out to them and see what they need to move it forward.
I was asking about the party itself, though, and your leadership. What, you know, is there some, and you answered it with the paid sick leave and so forth.
Well, certainly the other priorities have been the opiate epidemic, a statewide response, and part of that has been, it isn't the total answer. Part of that will be addressed through Medicaid expansion, which will better support our healthcare institutions who have been providing uncompensated care for a number of years for some of these folks. But I think opiates is a problem. Chloe's right about sick leave, family sick leave. There are conversations about different energy sources. We already have talked a little bit about that tonight. And then the other issue is schools. I think in places I've been, we've been talking a lot about schools, school funding, and school facilities, because look around, our schools are pretty outdated in Maine. So those are just some of the things, but there's no single thing that I...
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay. 2 hands here. If you're both fairly quick, we'll take them both, and then we'll cut it off there, I guess.
For Chloe, and it really centers around the idea that Maine is open for business. It's the 49th state in economic development, the last time I checked. All of these things that we talk about take money. The Green New Deal, I understand that this is, you have specific things in this particular iteration of it. It's going to be 2 years before you can put something else in. This wouldn't be an emergency thing. But when we talk about plastics and stuff like that, what do we replace them with? One of the things we can replace them with is hemp. Now, I'm not talking about recreational marijuana legalization here or any of that revenue that comes from that. I'm talking about growing hemp commercially to create things like the little bags that you put your produce in and stuff like that. You can make it out of hemp. Toilet paper can be made out of hemp. You grow hemp much faster than you grow trees. Is there any provision in any of the bills that we have currently about making development of commercial cannabis, hemp, really, not smoking pot kind of pot? Is there anything like that going on? Because I think that would be a huge revenue bringer, much bigger than recreational marijuana, is commercializing hemp. We have a lot of fun with that.
Definitely. I agree that we should be supporting the hemp industry here in Maine. I'm not going to be able to get too technical on this, but there is a little bit of a roadblock right now where Maine does not meet federal guidelines around hemp, and so right now hemp growers aren't applying for their licenses to grow this year, which are due on April 1st because of some challenges with wording and in statute. So we're trying to get that passed. We had a hearing on it a couple weeks ago. It's an emergency bill, and we're trying to get it passed so that those, you know, like, that's kind of step one. But I agree that, I mean, yeah, when we think about how fossil fuels are embedded in our lives, it's kind of unfathomable. Like, my clothes, everything I touch is produced, has been interacted with the fossil fuel economy in some way. So this is a long, complicated transition, but I think that the hemp industry here in Maine has a lot of promise, and we should be supporting it.
Okay, and
Well, I
Andy.
was just going to say, had a meeting with Senator Mike Carpenter, and he was saying as he went around, was one of the candidates for the Attorney General, and talked to lots of people, and the two issues that came up in the conversations he had with folks, one was the opioids, which we just touched on. The other was a great concern about state-tribal relations. And so I'm wondering, again, what you're hearing in among your colleagues and so on around that issue. I've been watching Judiciary, and I know there's going to be a number of bills coming up there, but I'm just sort of, I'm looking for buzz.
I think that from the governor's office down to the legislature, there's a lot of effort being made right now to improve and further develop relations, tribal relations, that have been, I think, over the years, there's been fits and starts, but it's really a concerted effort right now. And certainly the other thing that, when I went around, I heard about healthcare, opiates, energy, and schools, and property taxes and schools, and revenue sharing.
And I'll just add on that point that on Tuesday we voted to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. Yay. Which is a small symbolic step towards that, but I think the buzz is that it has to be a priority.
What was that vote about again, Carl?
We voted to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day in Maine.
Has the Senate voted yet on that?
They voted today, I think. I think it passed. I feel like we would have heard if it didn't pass. Yeah.
I think
Any other state done that?
okay.
Yes, they have. I'm not sure which one.
So,
to say.
last thoughts from either of you?
My last thought is that there are a number of bills. Everyone has different interests. Those are posted on the website, the legislative website. I post them every week. I'm sure you do. And I would ask you that you look at areas of interest and that you think of either submitting testimony or coming to Augusta and testifying for those things that matter most to you, that you show up and you make sure that you're heard.
Chloe?
Oh, no. Thank you.
I wanted to say to both of you, thank you very much for coming, and you're giving up the time to just take all kinds of questions and share your thoughts. I said in the invitation for this meeting, and I firmly believe it, that there are no representatives who are, their beliefs and their actions are founded more in how they care about people. It's been what has motivated so many of the things that I've heard about, seen about, and heard personally from Holly about over the years in her communities she serves, and the constituencies she's served in her jobs for DHHS as well, before she ever got to be a legislator representing the district. And Chloe has been doing things since she was in high school because she believes in what people need. Not corporations, not special interest groups, but what matters to the future for her generation and the older generation and everyone in between. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.